A modest black woman walked into Hudson Farm Club, one of the most expensive and prestigious shooting ranges in America. She came there simply to practice. But her quiet space was quickly disrupted by a world shooting champion. He mocked her, looked down on her, and even made her the punchline of a bet. $10,000 that she would miss the shot. But this woman was far from ordinary. She would use her own powerful ability to make the champion feel humiliated in the very game he created. Before we continue, I would like to know where in the world you are watching this story from. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe so you never miss out on inspiring and impactful stories like this one. The sun hung low over the rolling green hills of New Jersey as Dominique Taylor stepped out of the city shuttle and looked up at the wrought iron gates of the Hudson Farm Club, the most elite shooting range in America. It looked more like a private golf resort than a place to shoot. Polished stone pathways, trimmed hedges, a giant water fountain, and a marble lion sculpture greeted guests as they drove in through the security checkpoint. The club is not only expensive, it is also the embodiment of power. Inside, millionaires and power players wore high-end tactical jackets with name brands stitched proudly into the sleeves, Burberry Gucci custom-fitted gear in black gray and army green. These were men and women born into names that made other people nervous. Hedge fund managers, U.S. senators, legacy Olympians, and heirs to gun empires. Every single one of them was white. Every single one of them belonged. What about Dominique? She stepped through the front entrance holding a wrinkled envelope and a faded cloth tote bag that looked almost out of place next to the designer leather and monogrammed gun cases. Her outfit was simple, a gray knit sweater, slightly faded jeans, and white sneakers with soles that had seen better days. Her skin was deep brown, her hair tied back in a low, no-nonsense bun, and her posture was straight. Not proud, not loud, just still the kind of stillness that made people uncomfortable when they couldn't label it. She approached the reception desk with a soft but clear voice. "Hi, I'd like to sign in for today's open session," Dominique said quietly, offering a polite nod. The receptionist, a young blonde woman with flawless foundation and a look that had probably been trained in finishing school, gave her a long, obvious once-over. Not the kind of glance that checks for weapons, the kind that sizes up social status. From the frayed cuff of Dominique's sweater to the no-brand purse in her hand. "I'm sorry," the receptionist said with a plastic smile. "Hudson is a members-only facility. We don't do public tours." Dominique smiled, the kind of tired smile people use when they've been through this before. "I'm not here for a tour. I have a guest pass. A friend sent it." She unfolded a crumpled envelope and placed the paper on the desk. The receptionist didn't reach for it immediately, instead paused, as if touching it might make her complicit in a mistake. Finally, she took it, scanned it, and gave a half-hearted nod before motioning toward the back hall. "You can use the beginner range, all the way at the end." Across the marble lobby, near the VIP lounge, laughter erupted from across the lobby. A group of men in expensive shooting vests lounged by the leather couches. In the center stood Chase Whitmore, tall blonde, broad-shouldered, every bit the image of American shooting royalty. The son of a U.S. Senator, national shooting champion, and the face of Colt's premium competition series. Chase was flipping a coin in the air, surrounded by men who laughed at whatever he said, because that's what people did around men like him. "Hey, fellas," Chase said, smirking as he pointed with his chin toward Dominique. Someone took a wrong turn on the way to Walmart. Laughter echoed like buckshot in a tin room. Another voice chimed in, high-pitched and mocking. "Is she lost? Maybe she's looking for the gift shop." More laughter. Dominique didn't look. She had heard worse. She kept walking, eyes forward, but that didn't stop him. "Seriously, sweetheart, you looking for the bathroom or the vending machines?" one of his buddies added. Another voice, mocking high-pitched, chimed in. "I think she brought a Nerf gun." They laughed again. Loud, confident, safe in their numbers. And someone behind him called out, "You sure she's not here to clean the lockers?" Dominique heard every word. She didn't flinch. She didn't turn. Her hand simply returned the guest pass to her tote. Her gaze remained straight ahead, but inside something shifted. That quiet flicker of heat. It wasn't the first time she'd been made to feel invisible. It wasn't the first time someone had mistaken simplicity for weakness, silence for submission, or the color of her skin for an invitation to dismiss her. But this time, this space carried an edge. This was not just social exclusion. This was humiliation sported publicly. Chase walked closer, now cup of coffee in one hand, his shooting gloves tucked into his waistband. "I'm kidding, of course," he said, eyes scanning her like a spoiled cat toying with a mouse. "You're here to shoot. That's brave." Dominique turned to him finally. Her expression was unreadable. "Yes, I am." He tilted his head, almost amused. "What's in the bag? A Nerf gun?" Behind the desk, the receptionist smirked but tried to look away. Dominique nodded toward the check-in form. "Could you point me to the standard practice range?" "You want the basic lanes," the receptionist said stiffly, "through the glass doors, all the way to the left. Please don't wander." As she walked, the whispers followed, quiet chuckles, some pitying glances, some amused, none respectful. She made her way down the narrow hallway to the basic range, a space that looked more like a utility room than part of a luxury club. The floor was scuffed, the lighting less polished. Clearly, this was the part of the club meant for people who didn't belong. There were 10 lanes in total, each separated by thick plexiglass panels. She walked to the last lane, the one furthest from the others, a habit she had picked up long ago: stay out of the spotlight. Don't provoke, don't disturb, just do the work. She set her tote bag gently on the small metal shelf beside her. Unzipping it, she reached for a neatly wrapped cloth package and unfolded it with deliberate care. Inside lay a modest factory-made Smith & Wesson M&P9, no chrome, no custom grips, no engraving. Just matte black metal with slight wear along the edges and a history etched deep into its surface. It was the kind of gun that got the job done without asking for attention. A working woman's firearm. She stood straight, centered her stance, and exhaled slowly. She loaded the magazine and chambered the first round with quiet precision. Her hands moved with fluid confidence, not flashy, not aggressive, but with the certainty of repetition and muscle memory. She wasn't here to impress anyone. She was here because of a promise, one she wasn't ready to break. The scene might seem ordinary, but to the millions watching this video, to the people who've ever walked into a space where they were made to feel small, it meant something big. This was a quiet woman walking into a loud world, a black woman walking into a white-dominated institution, a citizen, not a celebrity, a widow, not a warrior, a woman with nothing to prove but everything to remember, and this is just the beginning. From behind the glass, laughter started up again. "Hey, check it out," one of the men chuckled, voice dripping with sarcasm. She brought a starter pistol to the Super Bowl. Chase Whitmore stepped forward from the group, holding a bottle of imported spring water like a prop. His designer shooting vest sat crisp on his chest, his mirrored sunglasses perched atop his head. $1 says she can't even hit the board, someone said behind him. Chase waved his hand with mock generosity. "I'll raise you." 10,000 says she's never even held a gun before today. The group erupted in laughter. One of them made a dramatic miming gesture of someone firing with their eyes closed. Another started whistling the theme from a reality show. They weren't whispering. They wanted her to hear. Dominique kept her eyes on the target downrange. Her back was straight, breathing steady, but inside the air thickened with heat. Not anger, not yet. It was something deeper. That old familiar ache of being laughed at without cause of being judged before doing a single thing. Chase took a few lazy steps toward her station, his arms folded across his chest, a smug grin dancing on his face. "Excuse me, ma'am," he began, his voice dripping with mock politeness. "This here's a professional range, not exactly the place for recreational hobbyists." Dominique finally lifted her head. Her deep brown eyes met his. She didn't smile. She didn't flinch. "I'm just here to practice," she said quietly. Her voice wasn't shaky. It wasn't angry. It was composed, and for a second, that threw him off. Just a second. He leaned in slightly. "Practice, honey. This place isn't for practice. This is where professionals sharpen excellence." There was laughter again, but quieter now. Some of the onlookers weren't laughing as easily anymore. A few crossed their arms. A couple glanced at Dominique with unease. Still, Chase pressed on. He stepped back, arms spreading theatrically. "How about this?" he said, pulling a notepad from his back pocket. "Let's make it interesting. You hit the bullseye from 50 yards, I pay you $10,000. You miss, you walk away. No practice, no redo. You pack your little purse and leave. Forever. Sound fair?" A murmur ran through the growing group of spectators. The commotion had drawn attention. A few range member staff and even the club manager, Rebecca Lynn, stood at a distance, watching, but none stepped in. Dominique didn't blink. Her left hand dropped to her side, and with a slow, unconscious motion, she turned her gold wedding band with her thumb. That small act seemed to center her. Her breath slowed. "I don't have $10,000, she replied, voice calm. Chase smirked. "I figured, but if I win," she added, "you pay. If I miss, I'll leave." "Deal." The room stiffened. There was no dramatic music, no rising soundtrack. But you could feel that collective shift in the air when something real starts happening. One of the older men at a nearby station muttered, "That's a hell of a bet." Someone else said, "Why is he doing this?" She didn't even provoke him. Another man added, "She's got every right to be here. Let her shoot." But Chase grinned like a boy who had never been told no. "Deal," he said. "Let's see what you've got." He waved to the others. "Everybody step aside. We're about to witness something memorable." And that's the moment everything shifted, because a few people, not all but a few, stopped laughing, stopped sneering, and started watching. Dominique took one more deep breath. Her heart wasn't pounding. Not yet. She had faced far worse than arrogant men in fancy boots. Dominique stepped forward and inspected the lane. She adjusted the distance manually, 50 yards, then turned back to retrieve her gun. Chase called out one last jab. "This'll be fun. Let's see if the charity case can shoot." Dominique ignored him. As she raised the gun and aligned her stance, her mind wasn't on the crowd or the challenge. It was on a quiet field in Virginia years ago where her husband had stood behind her, adjusting her elbows gently. Left foot forward, Dom. Shoulders loose. Trust your breath. Let the noise fade. His voice echoed in her head like a compass. Not a memory, a presence. Her fingers slid into position. The grip was natural. She locked her elbows, aligned her sight, and began her breathing pattern. Behind her, a staff member asked quietly, "Are we really doing this?" Chase responded loud enough for all to hear, "Of course we are. It's entertainment, right? Hat one line. It's entertainment hung heavy in the air. Because here's the truth. Every person watching knew what this really was. This wasn't a bet. It was humiliation served with a smile. This wasn't about skill. It was about reminding someone they didn't belong. And if you've ever walked into a space where people treated you like you were invisible or unworthy, then you know exactly what Dominique was feeling in that moment. A challenge not just to her aim, but to her dignity. And the way she stood, calm, collected, unbothered, was louder than any protest. There's something powerful about a person who doesn't raise their voice, who doesn't plead, who just stands their ground. She lined up the shot, and before squeezing the trigger, she whispered to herself so softly no one else could hear, "This one's for you, Bryce. Let's be real." How many times have you seen someone in power throw their weight around because they assumed someone else couldn't fight back? How many women, especially women of color, have been talked down to, dismissed, or turned into a joke just for existing in the wrong room at the wrong time? This scene, it's not fiction for a lot of people. If you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever been told you don't belong here, let us know in the comments. Tell us your story, because stories like Dominique's aren't rare. They're just rarely seen. 3 years earlier, it was a Sunday afternoon. Spring sunlight filtered through the thin branches above, catching on the dust in the air. Bryce Taylor stood behind her tall, quiet patient, his hands rough from training his voice deep but gentle. Navy fatigue's off-duty sleeves rolled calloused palms, adjusting her elbows. "Too tense, baby," he'd said, laughter hiding behind his breath. "You're not wrestling it. Let the gun settle into you, not the other way around." Dominique had chuckled back then. "I don't even know why I'm doing this." He kissed her temple, stood beside her, aimed into the woods. "Because if I ever can't be there, I need to know you can handle whatever walks through that door." She hadn't argued. He wasn't the kind of man you said no to when he spoke from that place. It wasn't ego. It was love shaped by war. Bryce was a sniper, one of the best in SEAL Team 6. His teammates called him Spectre because he could hit a target from nearly a mile away and disappear before the sound reached your ears. But to Dominique, he was just the man who made her feel safe in a world she didn't always trust. They'd met at a tax conference in Richmond. She was there presenting on federal compliance. He was visiting a wounded friend at the VA hospital. She bought him coffee by accident, thinking it was hers. He returned it with a shy nod and said, "Thank you for your service," even though she hadn't served. That night they talked for hours. 6 months later they were married in a courthouse ceremony, with only 4 people present, 2 witnesses and 2 service dogs. Bryce never spoke about his missions. Classified, he'd always say. But he spoke of ethics, of control, of precision. Shooting to him was never about power. It was about discipline, stillness, knowing exactly when to act and when to hold. Then came the call. They told her it was a crash helicopter failure during insertion, nothing else. closed casket, folded flag, 21 guns, 100 condolences, and silence. The kind of silence that makes your bones ache. For 3 years, Dominique hadn't touched a firearm, not even looked at one. The pistol Bryce gave her stayed locked in a box under their bed, wrapped in cloth like a memory she didn't dare wake up. But then last week, a letter arrived. It was from Michael Carter, one of Bryce's oldest teammates. Inside was a note in his firm, all-caps handwriting, Dom. Bryce told us to make sure you kept practicing. I know you haven't. It's time. Come to the range. I arranged a day pass. You don't owe it to us, but you do owe it to him. Dominique read the letter 10 times before touching the pistol. And now, here she was. 3 years later. Same weapon. Same ritual. Her heart beat steady as her finger tightened. Her sight lined up with the center of the bullseye. No wind. No chaos, just breath and memory. She exhaled halfway and squeezed. Bang! A single sharp report. Clean, crisp, controlled. The sound echoed briefly and faded, swallowed by thick padded walls. Dominique lowered her weapon. Behind her, the crowd went still. No laughter, no noise, just eyes locked on the target, gliding slowly back down the rail. The mechanized carrier ticked with each inch. Chase Whitmore leaned forward, arms crossed, sunglasses forgotten on his collar. His smirk was gone, replaced by something else, something tight in the jaw. Dominique didn't watch the crowd. She only stared at the paper drawing closer. The target arrived, white sheet, red circle, and at the very center, one hole, dead center, perfect bullseye. Gasps spread like a quiet wave. Someone let out a half whistle. Someone else murmured, "No way." Chase's face paled. His eyes scanned the target, looking for deviation, for tear, for any excuse to dismiss what he saw. Dominique remained still. She clicked the safety back on, placed the pistol carefully on the bench, and stepped back. Her hands were steady, her posture upright. Only her eyes betrayed the storm within, glossed, shimmering, locked onto the bullseye as if it were a grave marker. You always said I had calm hands, she thought. Turns out I still do. From the side, Rebecca Lynn, the club manager, took a step forward. Her voice was quiet but respectful. That was textbook. Dominique nodded once. Her voice was soft. I've had good teachers. When you've lost someone you love, especially someone who served their voice, doesn't really leave you. It stays in your breath, in your muscle memory, in moments like this, when you're tested. For so many families, a veteran's healing doesn't look like flowers and cards. It looks like showing up when you'd rather disappear. It looks like honoring a promise, even when no one's watching. And for the folks who know grief like Dominique knows it, you get this. You know exactly what it means to pick up something painful and use it to protect yourself, not to hurt others. Drop a comment below if you've ever kept going for someone who's gone. Tell us their name. Let them be remembered not in silence, but in strength. The sharp echo of Dominique Taylor's first shot still hung in the air like smoke that refused to clear. Every eye in the Hudson Farm Club was locked on the target, pinned at the end of lane 12, now showing a clean surgical hole, dead center in the bullseye. Nobody said a word for a few long seconds. No laughter, no coughs, not even a whisper. The silence wasn't respect yet. It was disbelief. That kind of shot didn't just happen. Not with a factory-grade pistol, not at 50 yards, and certainly not from someone the crowd had written off 15 minutes earlier. Rebecca Lynn, the club manager, took a step forward from where she had been watching with crossed arms and furrowed brows. Her eyes moved from the target to Dominique, then to the small group of wealthy spectators gathering behind Chase Whitmore. Something had shifted. You could feel it. The mood had turned like a crowd that had started by watching a sideshow and suddenly realized they might be witnessing a moment. But Chase wasn't about to let that moment belong to anyone else. Lucky shot, he barked, voice sharper than before. Anyone can get one in. He stepped forward, waving dismissively at the hushed onlookers. She probably got lucky lining it up. Fluke. Let's not pretend this means anything. Dominique didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Her stance had already spoken. Her calm had already unsettled the room more than any insult ever could. Chase looked her over again this time, not with mockery, but with the discomfort of a man who suddenly realized his joke wasn't funny anymore. You really think that proves something he challenged? If you're actually good, prove it. He gestured toward the control panel, voice rising to reclaim his authority in the room. 75 yards, 3 bullseyes in a row. If you miss even one, you admit you cheated and you walk. Right now. A ripple ran through the audience. People shifted uncomfortably. Some looked at Rebecca as if expecting her to intervene. She didn't. Dominique remained still. She turned her head slightly, looked at Chase, and then, without a word, reached for her left hand. Her fingers gently touched the gold ring on her finger, just once rotating it the way she had 100 times before. Her breath was steady. She finally spoke. "If I do it," she said softly, "you donate $50,000 to the Veteran Support Foundation." Chase scoffed. "Fine," he said, flashing that cocky grin again. "You're not doing it anyway. Let's go." Someone in the crowd muttered, "She's not even hesitating." Another whispered, "That first shot was no accident." Rebecca took a step closer to Dominique. Her voice was low. "Miss Taylor, you don't have to do this." Dominique looked her in the eyes. "I'm not doing it for him." She stepped forward, tapped the panel to adjust the target range. The metal track buzzed as the target was pulled back to the 75-yard mark. The air thickened. Everyone knew what was happening now. This wasn't a joke anymore. It was a showdown. Dominique picked up her weapon again. Her movements were smooth, quiet, exact, and in that moment you could see something remarkable happening. The crowd, which had been laughing before, now leaned in with a different energy. Some skeptical, some nervous, but many of them hopeful. Because deep down, whether they admitted it or not, people love watching the underdog rise, especially when the odds have been stacked. She took her stance. Again, her body fell into that same poise, that same form. Her breathing was audible now, deep in half-out hold. She didn't blink. Bryce's voice returned to her mind just as clear as it had been in life. Pressure's not the enemy. It's the test. When your heart's racing, let your body remember what you practiced. Don't think. Just trust it. She squeezed. Bang! A soft collective breath swept across the audience. The target remained at the far end still. Rebecca's eyes were locked on it. Dominique didn't look. She didn't move. She recentered her grip, rebalanced her shoulders. Steady again. Bang! No one was talking now. A bead of sweat slipped down the side of Chase's face. He didn't wipe it. Dominique adjusted her feet just slightly, aligning her center. Third breath in. Out. Bang. 3 shots, 3 seconds. Then silence again, but this time it felt like the moment before a verdict. The mechanical hum of the target returning filled the air, an agonizingly slow, rhythmic sound, like a drumbeat approaching. Click, click, click. The paper reached the front. 3 perfect holes. All centered, all clean. Dominique slowly set the weapon down. She didn't bow. She didn't gloat. She just stood, letting the moment settle on its own. Then, like a slow breaking wave, the murmurs started. A couple of soft, "Did you see that, S?" A stunned, "She actually did it." Then came the clapping, first polite, then louder, until it filled the room. Not everyone joined, but enough to make it clear something had just shifted. Dominique didn't flinch. She stood there, eyes forward, breathing steady, like she hadn't just shattered the ego of the club's golden boy. Chase. He just stood there too. Jaw tight, arms folded, face flushed. He stared at the target as if staring harder might change where the bullets had landed. Rebecca Lynn, still processing what she'd witnessed, stepped forward. "That was exceptional," she said, her tone softer now. Respectful, honest. Dominique glanced over, nodded once, and replied calmly, "Thank you." Someone from Chase's circle, maybe his assistant or just a friend who'd gotten in for the spectacle, cleared his throat. "Well, she got lucky 3 times, he said. Loud enough to hear, but not brave enough to say it directly to Dominique. Chase finally snapped back into motion. "No," he barked, his voice strained. "Something's off. No one just walks in and does that. Not here. Not against me." He stepped toward Dominique, trying to regain ground, but his tone betrayed him. Less confidence, more desperation. "Who are you?" he demanded. Dominique turned to him slowly. No smile, no fire, just control. "I'm the woman who just cost you 50 grand. A few chuckles broke through the tension. Chase's face hardened. "You think this proves anything?" he spat. 3 shots don't make you a pro." Rebecca intervened, placing herself between them. "Mr. Whitmore, the terms were clear. You made the bet." She delivered. Dominique collected her pistol, wrapped it back in the cloth, and placed it gently into her bag. As she slung it over her shoulder, she glanced back one last time. "If you want a rematch," she said, her voice even and steady, "make sure next time. The bet isn't your pride." Then she walked out, and for the first time all day the range felt small, quiet, humbled, because everyone in that room had just learned the same lesson: never underestimate the quiet ones. Chase Whitmore hadn't spoken a word since the crowd at Hudson Farm Club erupted in applause. He hadn't shaken Dominique's hand, hadn't acknowledged the 3 perfect shots. He simply walked off the range, his jaw locked tight, his fists clenched, his ego shattered. That night, his penthouse in the city was dim except for the glow of his laptop and the light from his whiskey glass. His phone pressed against his ear. "I need everything on her," he said coldly. "Dominique Taylor, lives in Boston now, used to be in Virginia. She's not just some accountant. Find out who trained her." The voice on the other end, a private investigator Chase had used more than once to dig up dirt on business competitors, replied with calm efficiency. "Understood. You'll have a full report within 72 hours. Chase ended the call without saying goodbye. "She made me look like a fool," he muttered to himself, jaw tightening. "In my club." But a few miles away, in a quiet apartment on the second floor of a weathered brick building in South Boston, Dominique Taylor was experiencing something entirely different. She sat out on the small balcony of her apartment, a steaming mug of chamomile tea cupped in her hands. The sun had started to set, casting soft orange hues across the neighboring rooftops. Cars passed in the distance. Somewhere, a dog barked. A city winding down. She hadn't spoken to anyone since the event. She didn't want to. Her phone had buzzed constantly since she left Hudson Farm, messages from people she barely knew, videos posted online, even a few reporters. She ignored them all. But her thoughts weren't on the crowd or the cameras. They were on him, Bryce. 3 years gone, and yet there were still moments like this, quiet moments, where she could feel him so clearly it made her chest tighten. She imagined what he'd say if he'd seen her today. "Not bad rookie," she could hear him joke. "Still drop your elbow a little on the second shot, though." Her lips curled into a sad smile. She looked up at the sky. "You should have been there." Her phone buzzed again. She ignored it at first. Then it buzzed once more. This time, a text from a name she hadn't expected. Rebecca Lynn. "I'm not supposed to be messaging you, but you should know Chase hired someone to look into your background. I overheard him today. He's digging deep. Be careful." Dominique stared at the message, unmoving. Her thumb hovered over the screen for a long moment. Then she typed slowly, "Thanks for letting me know. I have nothing to hide." A moment passed. Another message came through. "I believe that. But he's dangerous when embarrassed. Just watch your back." Dominique exhaled through her nose and locked the phone. She leaned back in her chair, the metal frame creaking slightly. Her tea had gone lukewarm. She didn't care. So this is what it felt like being a threat. Not because she shouted. Not because she fought, but because she was better, because she had dared to succeed quietly in a space where people like her weren't expected to. She thought about what Bryce had once said to her after someone tried to belittle her at a gun range near Norfolk. "People like that don't fear loud women," he said. "They fear the quiet ones, the ones who walk in, say nothing, and still outperform them." Her fingers once again reached for her wedding ring. He was right, but she hadn't wanted this. She hadn't asked for the spotlight or the rumors or the unwanted attention. She had only wanted to honor a promise. And now, someone was trying to rewrite her story. A small wave of anger rose in her chest. Not explosive, not dramatic, just firm. It wasn't about protecting her privacy anymore. It was about standing for every woman, every veteran's wife, every person who'd ever been underestimated and then hunted for daring to succeed. She looked down at the tea in her cup. Still, silent, cooling. Her voice was low, more breath than sound. "Okay, Chase, let's see what you find." Inside her apartment, she moved to the small wooden box on her bookshelf, the one she rarely opened. Inside were letters, medals, a photo of her and Bryce smiling in front of a lake, and at the bottom, a worn folder with Bryce's training logs. She ran her fingers across the edges. She hadn't touched any of this in months. She hadn't needed to, but now she needed to remember who she was before the grief, who she was when she stood beside him, not behind him. Her phone buzzed again, but she ignored it. She took out a notepad and a pen. She began writing not about herself, but about what Bryce had taught her. Techniques, notes, things he'd whispered in late-night practice sessions. The mental checklists he made her repeat, not because she needed them, but because she knew someone might try to twist them. And if Chase wanted a war, she'd respond with truth, with memory, with facts, but never rage. Rage was what men like Chase expected, what they used to discredit. But dignity, calm, unshakable, patient, that was what truly unnerved them. The announcement hit the shooting community like a lightning bolt. 2 days after Dominique Taylor's flawless performance, Hudson Farm Club issued a formal press release, a 10-station head-to-head exhibition match between Chase Whitmore, 3-time national champion and face of Colt Firearms, and the woman who stunned him in front of a crowd, Dominique Taylor. The club called it a friendly skills demonstration, but everyone knew what it really was, a calculated move by Chase to reclaim his shattered pride and do it on his terms. 10 stations, 10 different firearms, increasing difficulty. But the real kicker, the final station, worth 30% of the total score, would feature the Barrett M82, a long-range rifle known for its power complexity and cost. It was a platform Chase had trained with for years. And Dominique, as far as anyone knew, she'd never handled one in her life. The setup was clear: tilt the odds, stack the rules, and make her fail on stage. Dominique didn't blink. She accepted the challenge with a simple reply: "I'll be there." No press conference, no media spin, just quiet agreement. In the days that followed, Dominique went dark. She turned off her phone, avoided reporters, and declined interview requests. Instead, she drove 3 hours south to a private training range owned by Carl Williams, a retired Navy SEAL and one of Bryce's oldest teammates. Carl was tall, with a deep voice that didn't rush, a thick beard going gray at the chin, and eyes that had seen more war than most men could speak of. He didn't greet her with a hug, just nodded once when she arrived and said, "You still drink that awful mint tea?" Dominique smiled, only on good days. They spent the next 5 days in near silence. No cameras, no distractions, just sweat repetition and gunpowder. Carl brought out the Barrett on day 2, set it up on the long-range platform under the cold morning sun. The rifle looked like a monster laid out on the table, heavy black, polished, and intimidating. Dominique approached it slowly, not with fear, but with respect. Carl watched her hands. Steady. Smooth. "You ever handled something like this?" he asked. She shook her head. "Good," he said. "Means you won't come in with bad habits." He handed her a small leather-bound notebook, old worn corners bent. "Bryce gave this to me before his last deployment. He wrote in it after every session you two had." She opened it. Pages filled with Bryce's blocky handwriting. Notes, diagrams, wine correction formulas. On one page, a single line stood out, circled in red: Dominique 9 out of 10 bullseyes at 75 yards. Calm in a way I've never seen. Her stillness isn't emptiness, it's impact waiting. Dominique swallowed hard. Carl stepped back. "You ready to make him proud?" he asked. Dominique looked down the barrel of the Barrett. "I'm not doing this to make him proud," she said. "I'm doing this so no one ever questions that he taught me well." Back in Newark, news coverage ramped up. Talk shows debated her skills. Forums lit up with arguments. Was she lucky? Was she trained? Was she a threat? Chase leaned into the chaos. He appeared in interviews, always smiling, always charming. Told one reporter, "I think it's great that we're bringing more people into the sport. But let's be honest, a single good shot doesn't make you a champion." He kept his tone friendly, but behind the scenes, he tightened control. Pushed for the rule change, giving Station 10 more weight, ensured the Barrett would be customized to his specs, practiced with his private coach twice a day. "This ends the way it started," he told his assistant, "on my terms." The night before the competition, Dominique sat in her kitchen alone. The apartment was quiet. Outside, the wind blew softly against the windows. On the table were her gear, Bryce's notebook, and a folded note from Carl. "You don't need the world to believe in you. Just remember who already did." She looked at the mirror above the sink. Her own reflection stared back. No makeup, no armor. Just her. She whispered, "I'm not here to take a title. I'm here to take back space." The next morning, the club was unrecognizable. Media vans lined the outer gates. Folding chairs set up around the range. Dozens of members, guests, and sponsors filled the viewing area. Cameramen prepped their lenses. Everything was staged like a sporting event, but everyone knew it was a showdown. Chase arrived in full sponsor gear, embroidered vest, high-end sunglasses, custom earpiece. His handshake with club officials was rehearsed, his smile controlled. Dominique showed up 15 minutes later. No entourage, no press, just a duffel bag and a determined walk. She wore simple black boots, dark jeans, and a navy zip-up jacket with a small pin on the collar, a Navy SEAL trident, Bryce's. Chase smirked when he saw her. "Nice of you to come," he said. "Wasn't sure you'd show once the pressure set in." Dominique met his gaze, firm but calm. "Pressure doesn't scare me. Only people who think they own everything." He didn't respond. Rebecca Lynn, clipboard in hand, stepped to the front. 10 stations, she explained, each worth equal points except Station 10 worth 30%. Station 10 will use the Barrett M82. Chase nodded. Dominique said nothing, just stepped toward the line. As they took their positions, Carl stood quietly at the edge of the crowd. He didn't wave, just nodded once, and Dominique saw him. She felt her heartbeat slow. This wasn't just a match. This was reclaiming the right to be there without explanation, without apology. The parking lot of Hudson Farm Club hadn't seen this many people in years. Lines of black SUVs, media vans, and private sedans stretched down the drive. News crews, military veterans, local politicians, and elite club members poured into the range ground shoulder to shoulder, murmuring, checking their watches. Every seat was filled. Folding chairs had been added in rows. A second row of bleachers set up overnight. It wasn't just a match. It was an event. The camera crews came from 3 different networks. A live stream had already hit 500,000 viewers before the first station even opened. Dominique arrived alone. She wore dark jeans, worn but clean boots, and a simple blue button-up shirt, one that Bryce had bought her years ago, still crisp, still her favorite. Her duffel bag was slung over her shoulder, and in her left hand she carried something wrapped in a faded cloth, his notebook. She walked quietly to the prep area, head high, but expression calm. No fanfare. No smiles. No flashbulbs. Just focus. Chase arrived 15 minutes later, flanked by 2 assistants and a sponsor rep wearing matching windbreakers. He wore a branded shooting jacket covered in logos, sunglasses, even though the clouds were out, and a smug grin that barely hid the tension in his jaw. He waved to the crowd like he was stepping into a press conference. Dominique didn't look at him. Rebecca Lynn, clipboard in hand, stood between them. 10 stations, she said, clearly projecting over the murmurs of the crowd. Each shooter will fire the same weapons under the same conditions. Scores will be recorded per station, with Station 10, the Barrett M82, weighted at 30% of the final total. Chase smiled. Sounds fair. Dominique simply nodded. The match began. Station 1 Glock 9mm standard issue. Dominique steadied her grip, took one deep breath, and hit 5 for 5. Chase did the same. Scores were tied. Station 2, a modified Sig Sauer with an unusually tight trigger. Chase breezed through. Dominique paused mid-series, adjusted her stance slightly, shifted her weight, and hit perfect again. Carl, watching from the second row, barely moved, but his hand gripped the edge of his chair a little tighter. Station after station, Dominique adapted. A rifle scope with slight misalignment. She flipped open Bryce's notebook mid-round and adjusted her windage on the fly. An unfamiliar shotgun with a heavier recoil. She added a half-second delay between shots, bracing the shoulder differently. A worn-out carbine with inconsistent reset. She slowed her pace but didn't miss. Chase fired like a showman. Smooth, flashy, confident. His shots were good, excellent even. He scored consistently in the high 90s. But every time Dominique stepped up, the range went silent. Not because she was better, because she was exact. Every move had purpose. Every correction had calculation. She didn't try to impress. She tried to connect. By Station 7, the murmurs began. She's outscoring him. Someone whispered, she's adjusting for sabotage. Another muttered, no way, this woman's just an accountant. Station 8 featured an antique bolt action. The sight alignment had a slight delay, a trick even experienced shooters often overlooked. Chase hit 4 out of 5. Dominique, with her notebook open in her left hand, took slightly longer. But when the final shot hit and all 5 targets dropped in perfect rhythm, the applause was spontaneous. Rebecca looked over her clipboard. The scores were neck and neck. Then came Station 10, the Barrett M82. The crowd went still. This was the station Chase had pushed for, the one weighted 3 times heavier than the others. He'd trained with this rifle for years. Dominique had touched it for the first time less than a week ago. Chase fired first. 10 rounds. Smooth. Fast. 9 bullseyes. 1 slightly off-center. People nodded. Impressive. Hard to beat. Then it was Dominique's turn. She stepped up. The Barrett already loaded its weight nearly 20 pounds heavy in the shoulder. She didn't flinch. She flipped open Bryce's notebook and placed it beside her. Page flagged in red. A formula written in his hand, one only she understood. The wind picked up slightly. She adjusted the elevation. Carl leaned forward in his seat, whispering to himself, "Come on, Dom." Dominique inhaled. 3 points, she whispered under her breath. Grip. Sight. Center. Bang. The first shot rang out. Bullseye. Bang. Second shot, same result. By shot 5, the audience was visibly leaning in. Some were already on their feet. Dominique's face remained still, her breathing even, her trigger pull measured. Bang, bang, bang. 8 down, 2 left. She paused. Her fingers brushed the corner of the notebook. Her eyes softened just slightly. This is it, Bryce, she thought. Not for the win, for the weight, for the memory. Bang. 9. Chase shifted in his seat, face tight, jaw clenched. Dominique exhaled once slow. Bang. 10. The final round sliced through the still air and punched into the exact center of the target. Bullseye. The silence that followed wasn't stunned. It was sacred. Then thunder. Applause erupted like a wave. People stood. Hands clapped. Some whistled. Some cried. One elderly veteran in the back wiped his eyes, whispering, "That woman carries ghosts." Rebecca stood slowly and announced the final tally. Dominique Taylor, full score, 10 out of 10. Chase Whitmore, 9 out of 10. Final result, Dominique Taylor is the winner of the Hudson exhibition match. The cheers rose again. Chase stood, frozen eyes, darting mouth slightly open, but no words came out. Dominique stepped back from the rifle, picked up Bryce's notebook, and quietly closed it. She didn't raise her fist. She didn't smile wide. She just nodded once toward Carl in the crowd. A small salute returned. People like Dominique don't win because they want attention. They win because when the world dares them to be small, they choose to show up anyway. And when they do, it reminds us all that dignity doesn't shout. It shows. In a society where loudness often gets the stage quiet, mastery is revolutionary. This wasn't about medals. It wasn't about cameras. It was about truth. That real strength comes from those who have carried loss, been underestimated, and still chose to rise. If you've ever found yourself standing alone, having to prove your worth in a room that wanted to ignore you, you're not alone. Comment below with a time you stood your ground. We see you. Chase Whitmore's smile had disappeared the second Dominique fired her 10th shot. By the time the crowd gave her a standing ovation, his lips were pressed into a thin, tight line. His hands, once relaxed, now twitched at his sides. When the final scores were announced and Dominique declared the winner, his shoulders went stiff, as if someone had slammed a door he couldn't reopen. He tried to hold it together, tried to shake it off, maybe with a joke, a spin, anything to keep the cameras from catching what he really felt. But the pressure had been building for days. The whispers, the doubt, the loss of control, and now, in front of the media, the members and the woman who had just outshot him on his home turf. It cracked. She cheated, he yelled suddenly. The entire audience fell silent again. People turned their heads. Even the photographers stopped clicking. Chase pointed at Dominique, voice rising, eyes wide. She rigged something. "There's no way someone like her walks in here and beats me at my own game." Rebecca Lynn stepped forward from the officials' table. Her heels echoed against the concrete as she approached, calm but firm. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, "clearly, please stop." She must have modified the rifle or had some kind of assistance. He shouted again. "This whole thing's a setup." Dominique didn't flinch. She didn't even look at him. She was still standing at her lane, holding Bryce's notebook in both hands, the way someone holds something sacred. "Are you seriously going to let this slide?" Chase turned to the officials. "You think this is real? You think that score is legitimate?" Rebecca's tone didn't change. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, "we reviewed security footage after a concern was raised about potential tampering. And we found something. Would you like me to show it now?" Chase blinked. "What are you talking about?" Rebecca tapped on her tablet. A flat-screen monitor lit up behind the officiating table, displaying footage from a time-stamped security camera. The room was completely still. The video showed a man, one of Chase's personal assistants, entering the equipment storage room the night before the match. He carried a small black case and spent several minutes at the bench where the match weapons were prepped. Specifically, the rifle that had been assigned to Dominique. Rebecca continued calmly, but with purpose. "We pulled the modified specs from the gun after the match. The trigger weight had been adjusted to be significantly higher than regulation, not unmanageable, but enough to compromise control. It was done only on the firearm assigned to Miss Taylor." Murmurs spread through the crowd. Chase's face drained of color. That's not mine. That's not my guy," he stammered. "You can't prove I told him to do anything." Rebecca raised an eyebrow. "Actually, we can. Club security captured audio from the hallway the same night. It matches your voice, giving explicit instructions." Chase's jaw twitched. From the crowd, someone said under their breath, "He really tried to cheat, and still lost." Dominique stepped forward now. Her voice was low, but carried clearly through the microphone nearby. "You had a choice," she said, looking Chase in the eyes for the first time since the match began. "You could have lost with grace. You could have walked away with your name intact." She held up the notebook in her hand, Bryce's. "But you chose to break the rules because you thought no one would believe someone like me could win fair and square." She looked at Rebecca. "I don't need an apology," then turned back to Chase. "But you should know every time you say I cheated, you're not insulting me. You're confirming you were afraid." She turned and walked off the lane, still holding the notebook, still steady, still silent. The crowd didn't cheer, not yet. It wasn't the time. But their eyes followed her with something deeper than applause, respect. Behind her, Rebecca spoke into the microphone once more. "Effective immediately, Mr. Whitmore's membership at Hudson Farm Club is suspended, pending a full review. His competitive records with this facility will also be placed under investigation." Reporters snapped photos, phones went up, live feeds started rolling. Chase stood alone, surrounded by everything he had built and everything he had just lost. There's something satisfying, deeply satisfying about watching truth come to the surface on its own terms. Dominique didn't scream. She didn't demand revenge. She didn't need to twist the knife. She just stood there, calm, prepared, and let the facts speak for themselves. Because that's what real strength looks like. Not manipulation, not cheating, but dignity under pressure. A lot of us know what it feels like to be accused just because we were better than they expected, to be called a fraud simply because someone couldn't handle that we didn't fit their mold. And when you've been on the receiving end of that kind of injustice, seeing someone rise above it with quiet confidence is more than just powerful, it's healing. Let us know in the comments, have you ever been accused of being too good to be real? What did you do? Because here's what Dominique taught us today. The truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs to stand its ground. It had been 5 days since the match, 5 days since Dominique Taylor stood on that shooting line and reminded the country what quiet strength really looked like. The headlines hadn't stopped. Cable news panels debated her story. Op-eds called her the calm revolution. Veterans groups flooded her inbox with messages of respect, support, and unexpectedly requests for guidance. But Dominique didn't chase the attention. She stayed home, stayed grounded, answered only the calls that mattered. One of those came from Colonel Julian Marks, retired Marine and director of the Veteran Support Foundation. He didn't introduce himself with titles. Just a voice, low and steady, calling early on a quiet Tuesday morning. "You've made quite an impact, Miss Taylor," he said. Dominique, still in her robe, held her coffee with both hands. "I wasn't trying to." "Even better," he replied. "I'm calling because we've launched a program shooting therapy for veterans struggling to reintegrate. Men and women coming back with trauma, some with physical injuries, most carrying things they don't have words for. We need someone who doesn't just shoot well. We need someone who understands what war leaves behind." Dominique didn't answer right away. Julian paused, then added, "You don't have to say yes, but I read what your husband wrote about you, the notebook. Bryce believed you had the stillness a lot of our soldiers needed. I think he was right." Dominique closed her eyes. A long breath in, a longer one out. "Okay," she said. "I'll come meet them." 2 weeks later, Dominique stood inside a modest facility in northern New Jersey. No banners, no sponsors. Just a plain shooting range, a few folding chairs, and 6 veterans waiting for her to speak. They were all different. 2 were men in their 20s, eyes hollow, bodies tense. One woman, maybe in her 40s, sat stiffly in a wheelchair. Another leaned against the wall, arms crossed, silent, almost defiant. One looked down the whole time. The last one, a heavy-set man with a prosthetic leg, watched her without blinking. Dominique walked to the front. No PowerPoint, no introductions, just her voice calm and steady. "I'm not a soldier," she said. "I didn't serve. I didn't carry a rifle in a war zone. But I lived with someone who did. I loved someone who did." She looked down, then back up. "I'm the widow of Master Chief Bryce Taylor, and for 3 years I didn't touch a gun because it hurt too much to remember. But then I remembered something else." She held up the notebook. "He taught me that shooting wasn't about aggression. It was about control of your breath, your thoughts, your fear. And sometimes the hands that shake the most are the ones that learn how to steady themselves best." No one said a word, but no one looked away either. The sessions began simple. Dominique didn't push. She taught the same way Bryce had taught her, slowly, deliberately. She didn't talk about technique at first. She talked about presence, about breathing, about listening to your heartbeat instead of fighting it. One man couldn't fire the first day. She sat next to him for an hour and said nothing. just breathed with him. The woman in the wheelchair flinched every time someone reloaded, so Dominique showed her how to do it one click at a time until her fingers moved with confidence instead of fear. By the end of the first week, something had shifted, not just in them, in her. Because Dominique had come to teach, but she realized she was still healing too. Colonel Marks visited one Friday afternoon. He watched quietly from the observation room, arms crossed over his chest. Dominique was helping a young man named Reuben line up his stance. Reuben had visible scars and deeper ones you couldn't see. But as he fired his fifth shot and hit near center, he lowered his weapon, turned to Dominique, and said quietly, "I didn't think I could do this again." Dominique smiled just a little. "You never forgot," she replied. "You just stopped trusting it." When the session ended, Julian approached her. "You belong here," he said. Dominique shrugged. "It's not about me." "That's exactly why it should be," he replied. By the third week, something new appeared on the wall of the training room, a plaque mounted with care. The Bryce Taylor Center for Marksmanship and Reintegration. Calm is not weakness. It is readiness. Underneath, Dominique had placed a folded flag and a small photo Bryce in uniform smiling, not with pride, but with peace. We often talk about healing like it's a destination, something you arrive at when time passes. But the truth is, healing often begins in shared spaces, in simple acts, in the presence of someone who understands without needing to ask. Dominique didn't walk away from her victory and disappear. She walked toward others, especially those carrying burdens like hers. Because that's what the best among us do. They don't just win, they build. And for those of you watching, if you've ever felt broken, if you've ever thought your quiet meant weakness, let this chapter remind you, sometimes the most powerful people in the room are the ones who sit with your pain without needing to fix it, only to share it. If that speaks to you, drop a comment, share who helped you heal, or share if you're still trying. Either way, you're not alone. The ballroom was quiet, not silent. There was light music, the gentle clinking of glasses, and murmurs of polite conversation, but the kind of quiet that settled when people felt something sacred was about to happen. The annual fundraiser for the Veterans Support Foundation had drawn its largest crowd yet. More than 200 guests filled the round tables dressed in respectful suits and evening dresses. No red carpet, no flashiness. Just people who understood sacrifice and wanted to honor those who carried its weight. At the front of the room, under a simple banner with the foundation's crest, Dominique Taylor stood at the podium. She wore black slacks and a navy blouse. No jewelry except her wedding ring. She looked out across the room, paused, and spoke slowly. Clearly, 1 year ago she began. "I showed up at a shooting range with nothing but a day pass and an old pistol. I wasn't there to make a point. I wasn't there to make headlines." She swallowed softly, her fingers brushing the edge of Bryce's notebook, which sat beside her on the podium. "I went because of a promise. My husband, Master Chief Bryce Taylor, taught me how to shoot, not to compete, not to perform, but so I could protect myself if he couldn't be there. That day, I picked up the gun again, just to keep that promise." Her voice didn't shake, but her eyes shimmered. "I thought it would be one day, one shot, and then I'd walk away again. But instead, that promise led me here, to all of you." The room was still. "I've worked with dozens of veterans since that day, men and women carrying wounds we can't see. They've taught me more than I ever imagined, about pain, about courage, about what it means to try again when everything in your body tells you not to." Dominique looked down for just a moment, then back up. "So tonight, we honor not just those who have served, we honor those who are still fighting their way back. And I'm proud to announce something that has been in the works for months." Rebecca Lynn stepped forward from the side of the room, handing her a black envelope. Dominique opened it, took out a card, and read, "The Foundation's board has officially approved the creation of the Bryce Phantom Taylor Marksmanship Award, a yearly scholarship given to a veteran who has demonstrated not just shooting skill, but emotional resilience, community leadership, and commitment to recovery through marksmanship." Applause rose, not explosive, but steady, heartfelt. Dominique waited for it to settle before continuing. "Our first recipient is someone who embodies all of that. A man who came to us barely speaking, who had every reason to walk away from life, and didn't." The spotlight shifted to a man seated near the stage. His name was Jackson Lee. He stood slowly dressed in a navy blazer, a deep scar along his right cheek, his posture stiff from old injuries. But his hands didn't tremble. His eyes were steady, Dominique stepped down from the podium, handed him the plaque, and shook his hand. Jackson took the microphone, voice low but firm. I was a ranger. After I got out, things got dark. I almost didn't make it. If it hadn't been for this program and for Miss Taylor, I wouldn't be here tonight, wouldn't be standing, wouldn't be helping new guys the way I'm able to now. He looked at Dominique, then at the audience. We talk about heroes like they're loud, but some are quiet. They just show up when you need them most. He stepped back. The applause was louder this time. Some were on their feet. Dominique returned to her table near the back. She sat down slowly, her hands folded over the notebook on her lap. Her thumb touched the edge of her ring, and she turned it gently just once. She looked down and whispered, "Your name still lives, not through statues, through people. I kept my promise, Bryce." Her eyes welled, but she didn't wipe them. She let the moment stay. Later that evening, long after the stage had cleared and most of the guests had left, Dominique walked into the training room at the Foundation Center. The lights were dim, the targets reset. In the far lane, a young woman, maybe 22, stood holding a pistol in both hands. Her left hand trembled, but her eyes didn't leave the target. Dominique walked up slowly. "You all right?" she asked. The woman nodded. I can't stop the shake." Dominique smiled softly. "It'll stop when you stop fighting it." The woman looked confused. "It's not about stopping the shake," Dominique said. "It's about breathing through it." She stood behind her, adjusting her elbows gently. Grip, sight, center. The woman fired. It wasn't a bullseye, but it was close. She exhaled slowly, and her hands stopped shaking. Strength doesn't always look like dominance. Sometimes it looks like patience. Like walking back into a place that hurt you not for revenge, but to help the next person through it. Dominique didn't build a legacy with trophies. She built it with a promise, with quiet moments, with helping hands. And that's the kind of victory that lives far longer than applause. The story of Dominique Taylor was more than just a tale of marksmanship. It was a journey of quiet strength, of holding on to dignity when the world tried to strip it away. Her story reminded us that true power doesn't come from fame titles or applause, but from keeping your word, honoring those who came before you, and lifting others up, even when no one's watching. In a world that often rewards the loudest voice, Dominique showed us that calm courage and character can still win. And what about you? If you were in Dominique's shoes, standing alone, facing pressure, facing doubt, how would you respond? Would you fight back with noise or with quiet conviction? If this story moved you, if you saw a part of yourself in her strength or in her stillness, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs encouragement today, and subscribe to our channel. Every comment, every click helps us bring more stories like Dominique's to people who need to hear them. Thank you for watching, and thank you for believing in stories that matter.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.